Local government is big business and growing all the time. It represents almost 1/10 of our national expenditure. It employs close on 2 million people. Manual workers, craftsmen, office workers, professional men and women. But this big business is fundamentally a collection of many small ones. And like any business, each one faces the problem of rising costs, and often the difficulty of recruiting and holding labour tempted by higher earnings elsewhere.
What these reports reveal is far from satisfactory. Some of our departments are below establishment strength, and in consequence it is difficult to maintain an adequate service. Indeed, in one service, refuse collection, there is danger of a serious breakdown. Now, because of this situation, the Borough Engineer has been looking into the possibilities of using work study to help us with these problems. This is perhaps an opportune moment for him to tell us something about the subject.
Thank you, sir. Well, as you may know, the purpose of work study is to increase productivity, to improve efficiency by making better use of existing resources and labor. And the essence of it lies in subjecting every part of an operation, however large or small, to purposeful questioning. Now, work study has two main aspects: the study of the method by which a job is done, so that the best way of doing it can be found, and the measurement of the amount of work involved to discover just how long it should take. There's no job that cannot be questioned and measured in this way. No operation that cannot be improved. Eliminating waste will give the ratepayers better value for their money, while sound incentive schemes based on work measurement will give our operatives a chance to earn more and so help with recruitment and in retaining staff. It would be wrong, however, to consider this matter only in terms of pounds, shillings and pence. Our first consideration must be the increased efficiency of our activities and better standards of service for the public.
Mr. Chairman, aren't we forgetting our obligations to our employees? How about men that work study makes redundant?
Redundancy is unlikely to be our problem. As this report clearly shows, many of our services are well below strength. Our need is to make the best use of the existing labour force, and I share the Borough Engineer's view that work study will help us do that. Of course, it may mean that some men will have to change their jobs or even their departments in the interest of efficiency.
And suppose the new job is of a lower grade than the old?
We can give an assurance that no employee will suffer financially as a result of work study.
It's all very well talking about that.
Mr. Chairman, I've always had doubts as to whether the techniques of work study have any value or any place in the activities for which this council is responsible. And nothing has been said so far to make me change my mind. Just because such techniques are successful in industry is no guarantee that they can be applied to the work of local government. Are we really expected to equate the flow of production in a factory with the diverse activities of the council's services? We've also heard a lot of vague references to other local authorities who've used work study. What authorities? And what precisely have they done?
A committee divided on an issue which may come before the representatives of any local authority. And there are usually two clear schools of thought on the subject. Some members, like Councillor Houston, sincerely doubt the value of work study in local government activities, while others, like Councillor Prentice, are enthusiastic. But there are also some who are uncertain and uncommitted. Councillor Connor, Chairman of the Finance Committee, is one of these.
Surely these work study enthusiasts, if they wish to convince us, should come here with objective evidence. Tell us how work study can improve the efficiency of our services. Or give us some concrete examples. But what evidence are we being offered? We've been asked to take work study on trust, to spend money on an act of faith.
Not at this stage. I take Councillor Houston's point, and I propose that we postpone further discussion on this matter until the Borough Engineer has visited some authorities who have used work study, and he has reported back to us.
Agreed? Agreed.
As a result of his tour, Ward was in a position to present objective facts, figures, and detailed case histories. But before presenting his formal report to the Establishment Committee, he discussed it informally with the chairman of the committee and two of his colleagues.
Efficient schemes I saw.
These examples sound very fine. But for all we know to the contrary, conditions in such areas may be very different from our own.
Oh, exactly. That's why work-study solutions and techniques must be tailored to the problems of each service and authority to suit its size, nature, and particular circumstances.
If I remember correctly, it was Councillor Frank Houston who demanded precise details of what other authorities had done.
True, but if I'm to be really convinced, it must be in terms of this town and its services. You show me how work-study can be applied to our refuse service and exactly what it can achieve.
Well, refuse collection is not the easiest service to make a start on.
But we've got more problems with refuse than anything else. We're always getting complaints about the inefficiency of the service.
And when they do finally call, they won't take more than one dustbin load. Yet it's because they're overdue that I have the extra rubbish. What am I supposed to do with it? Dump it in the town hall?
If this council uses work-study, refuse collection will have top priority.
Well then, what exactly are the problems of the refuse service? We all know about undermanning and the difficulties of recruitment and retaining men. But these are not the only factors. The wrapping materials from the goods people buy increase every year. The result is that refuse becomes bulkier and takes up more space in the vehicle. Collection from flats and tenements must be organized to handle various types of communal containers. But for houses, the service must be geared to bin collection, a far more laborious and time-consuming operation. Different buildings, different premises, different amounts of refuse, different methods, varying amounts of traffic, extreme weather conditions. Work study takes all these factors into account in finding the right solution. Our aim is to provide a service which will run to schedule, using men and equipment more effectively.
But who would do the study?
Well, that's a decision we'd have to take later. Let's assume, however, that we've engaged an outside consultant. His brief is to study the refuse service. And the first thing he'd do would be to make a pilot survey. This would give him a fairly good idea of what the main problems were, what might be done, how long it would take, and the approximate cost.
And presumably we wouldn't commit ourselves to any full-scale study of the service unless we agreed with his findings.
But surely you consult the supervisors and the trade unions before proceeding further.
Oh, of course. Keeping everybody fully informed is vital every step of the way. If we don't, our plans will reach those most concerned as distorted rumours, breed resentment, suspicion, or even worse, fear.
And who's going to run it, eh? Them in their warm offices at 9:30? Not bloody likely it'll be you and me on the job at 7:30. We'll be lumbered with all the problems of their fancy schemes.
And the men will probably react, even with official trade union backing for our plans, just as strongly as the supervisors.
I don't care what the unions agree to. I ain't having no bloke following me about with a stopwatch.
It may be all very fine in factories, mate, but I'm no factory worker. I'm not part of a bleeding conveyor belt. I work for the council, see?
It's far better to anticipate opposition and go out to meet it than wait for it to explode. Every facet of the work-study plan must be discussed with the supervisors. They're the men who will ultimately have to operate the new scheme. And the best man to answer many of their questions is the consultant we intend to use. Many supervisors have fears of work-study, which are often more deeply rooted than those of the men. Especially the fear of being made superfluous, of having their authority and responsibility undermined by the new technique. Such fears must be brought into the open and discussed. And this equally applies to the operatives, although their fears, opposition and prejudice often arise from different causes. Of course, all consultations with the men must be through the appropriate trade union. And at the meeting with the men, an official of the union should be present. The men must be told exactly what we intend to do, and all their questions fully answered without dodging any of the tricky issues. When everyone affected has agreed to cooperate, the consultant gets down to his pilot survey. This will give him a broad picture of the service and its main problems. Then With the council's agreement to his findings, the consultant can start his main study. And he begins by turning his attention to an individual dustman. He makes an accurate record of exactly what the man does. This basic information he records in various ways. A flow process chart shows purpose and sequence of work so that it can be improved. A multiple activity chart shows the man's workload in relationship to the vehicles. A string diagram shows how far the man has to walk to and from the vehicle, as well as congestion points. By means of these techniques, the consultant will compile a full and accurate record of exactly how the job is done. And having studied one man, he turns his attention to the whole gang. Now, because of the difficulty of accurately observing and recording the activities of so many men, the consultant finds it helpful to use a memo motion camera. This takes a single picture every second, and so literally records everything that is happening. On the film, which can be studied picture by picture or run fast, it's easier to see the amount of wasteful walking done by the team. The work in the street has taken 35 minutes, and those 35 minutes of detailed observation can now be summarized in charts and diagrams. This will reveal many things. For example, that the vehicle is idle for most of the time, while men have to walk long distances. And now, the whole operation must be critically examined. The consultant challenges every aspect of the activity, subjecting every part to purposeful questioning. Each one is questioned to see whether it's necessary, and if it is, whether it's being done in the best and most economical way. The consultant searches for work and delays which can be eliminated. And the simple basic question which reveals them is why? From all the information he's gathered, the consultant begins to develop a more efficient method of doing the job, which he discusses with the supervisors and the men.
Right now, fellas, let's try something quite new. There are 6 of you and 3 operations. Now, I want you to get into pairs, 1 pair to each operation. Let's see what we can do, fellas.
Right, lads, we'll give it a try. Reg and Pete, you get them out. Nat and Colin, you tip them. And Alan and I take the empties back.
Okay, Reg.
The experiment works well. The gang appears to work faster, but only because delays and wasteful activity have been eliminated. Collection now moves smoothly and efficiently, while the workload is balanced by switching jobs between the team. By this new method, the collection time in the street has taken 25 minutes. By the old method, it took 35. You multiply that saving of 10 minutes by the number of streets serviced by the whole refuse department in a week. Not only would the undermanning problem begin to disappear, but we could give the public a more frequent service.
Now that you're familiar with the techniques, why can't we ourselves do exactly what you described? Apply that method to all gangs. It sounds so easy.
Only because I deliberately simplified everything. Now, in practice, it would be far more complicated and strictly a job for an expert. That method of collection I described could only be applied in certain limited areas, where there's, say, a short walking distance from the house to the footpath. But in houses with a long footpath, obviously the same method would be unsatisfactory. A different solution is also required for blocks of flats. For business premises where the dustman has to walk through the building. For premises where collection has to be made from the back of buildings. Each area is different and requires a different solution. In some cases, another way of manning the vehicle, perhaps with less men, perhaps more. In other cases, an entirely different type of vehicle may be the answer. Disposable paper sacks might be the right solution in another district. There's no single solution which can be applied ad hoc. Work study is a technique which can only be applied effectively by a trained and experienced man. But once this critical approach to the job is accepted, improvements are possible all along the line.
And that's it. The refuse service work studied.
Oh no, there's still plenty of scope for further improvement by the replanning of the vehicle routes. But this is a more complicated business, usually involving other techniques in addition to work study. However, this vital rationalizing of our routes, combined with new working methods, would increase the efficiency of our existing labor force to a point at which we'd be able to provide a really efficient collection service.
Well, at least that should keep the ratepayers happy.
But that's not the end of it. Having established a new and improved way of doing the job with method study, the consultant is now in a position to use work measurement. And method study followed by work measurement is the best way of obtaining information which can be used for all sorts of things, as a basis for future planning, balancing workloads and measuring the effectiveness of the service. Management controls, they call it in industry. And of course, it provides an equitable way, a way that can be understood by the men and their representatives for the calculation of incentive bonus schemes.
Bonus? You mean we can't apply work study without paying bonus?
Well, I don't think the unions or the men are likely to cooperate unless you did. I mean, after all, it would be an incentive bonus based on a better performance from the men, payment for more output, their share in the increased productivity.
It will help the men's actual earnings to fall more into line with local industry, an essential step if we're to keep our best men. After all, either we're saving money, working with less staff, or giving a better service.
Usually a combination of all three.
Well, I suppose we can't quibble too much about that.
But what about other services? Did you see anything on your tour to show work study can help us with them?
Oh yes, I saw plenty of evidence. A good and simple example was on a municipal building site. Now, for that particular assignment, the work study man had used a technique called activity sampling. He records at random intervals, to avoid coinciding with the work cycle, what each man is doing at the actual moment of observation. For instance, if the barrower is wheeling a load of concrete, the work study man records transporting. If the loader is waiting, he records non-productive. If the spreader is working, he records spreading, and so on. The study must be continued until the number of recordings is sufficient to ensure accurate coverage of all normal variation in the conditions. Loading, non-productive. Spreading, transporting, non-productive, non-productive. After analyzing the observations, the work of the team could be properly balanced. Now, the spreader helps with the barrowing by wheeling the first barrow load of concrete from the mixer to the site. He then gets on with the job of spreading. The barrower, after loading his own barrow, positions another under the mixer before taking his load to the spreader. The loader, having filled the third barrow, recharges the mixer. Then he's free to take his load to the spreader. Meantime, the barrower returns to the mixer, where he's eventually joined by the others to help recharge the hopper. The result? An increase in the rate of concrete laid of 60%, higher earnings for the men, and a saving in costs of 40%. Work study applications are not confined to manual operations. The same techniques, sometimes called O&M, can be just as effectively applied to the administration, to the departments in the town hall, like this post room, which the work study officer is investigating. As a start, he's already made a general survey of the work, including a sketch of the post room, which is little more than a narrow passage with a store at one end. Making up a parcel means fetching corrugated paper from the storeroom. The work study officer looks at this particular operation until he's familiar with it. Each separate detail is recorded. Where materials are kept, how they are used, until he has a complete picture of the job. And then he goes to other operations. A detailed study of each operation will lead the work study officer to a detailed picture of the work of the whole department. Then he can study all the facts as he searches for a better way of doing things. What about knocking down the wall to the storeroom and extending the benches? Can't all the packaging materials be kept together? Can't the operations be regrouped? Intelligent examination and questioning of the facts led to the right answer, to physical improvements and better procedure in the post room. it was now possible to transfer some of the staff to other departments. The wall to the storeroom was knocked down and the various jobs repositioned. Parcels are now made up where the store used to be. All materials are to hand and the work no longer gets in the way of other people. Where analysis pointed to a justification of the cost, simple machinery was installed. But most of the improvements came from the regrouping of the operations and their rationalization with the help of simple, inexpensive articles. My tour convinced me that any department and any service, regardless of what size and type of local authority operates it, will benefit from work study. In school cleaning, old-fashioned manual methods have been replaced by machines. But only a proper work-study investigation can decide what is the most suitable machine for each task, how many of each type is required, and plan a work schedule so that each operation is performed in the most economical way and in proper relationship to the other operations. At one of our local libraries, the number of borrowers has increased due to a new housing estate. This has created problems for both the staff and the borrowers. Now, on my tour, I saw a similar-sized library, which had the same problem. But here, the council's work-study department was asked to help find a solution. Working closely with the library staff, they made suggestions which led to a better and more efficient use of space. The bottleneck around the counter was removed by installing a microfilm camera. Again, this was not merely a matter of using a machine, but of using the right machine to solve the problem. At this recently built library, the work-study men were called in right at the beginning. With the architect and library staff, they were able to plan every detail. And so many problems were solved where they should be, on the drawing board. Obviously, some activities cannot be radically changed. But a study of any job will generally reveal some unnecessary or wasteful movement, which, if eliminated, will make work easier and increase efficiency. This was very obvious in another service I saw, housing maintenance. Some authorities I visited have work-studied the service, fixed work targets, and applied an incentive bonus where appropriate, based on accurate work measurement. The result is increased productivity for the authority and a better service for the ratepayer. For the operative, it's meant easier and more efficient working methods, and a chance to increase his earnings.
Tell me, is it absolutely essential to engage a consultant?
No, there are three ways, I suppose, in which we could start work study. Using the services of a consultant is one. Sending someone from our own staff for professional training is another. Or thirdly, we could engage an experienced work-study engineer on a permanent basis and let him build up his own department, just as our own man would.
And the snags?
Well, there are arguments for and against all three. This is something the committee will have to decide later on.
In essence, then, we have to decide between using a consultant and setting up our own department.
You mean we've convinced you? You'll support our plans?
I've always had doubts as to whether the techniques of work study have any value, any place in the activities for which this council is responsible. Well, as I now realize, those doubts have been due to my ignorance. The evidence I have heard tonight has completely convinced me. I'm convinced that in work study, properly applied, with the cooperation of the trade unions, we have a technique for improving our services to the ratepayers and a fair and equitable basis for paying our operatives and giving them a chance to earn more, and the means of safeguarding the interests of the council by the most economic and efficient use of our resources. Councillor Prentice's report has my wholehearted support, and I'm sure it will have yours too.
All those in favour of the motion, please show. Thank you. And those against? Then the motion is carried.